Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the path to liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center. This is the show for Wednesday, February 7th, 2024. And on this episode, I've got a pretty big update. The latest news from the Nullification movement. We're talking things like the Second Amendment Preservation Act, the Defend the Guard Act, rejecting central bank digital currency, even maybe some financial privacy, maybe a little bit more. But first, I want to start out with a quick overview of our strategy, what we learned from the founders, what they taught us on how to defeat the feds without relying on the feds to somehow magically do what they never do, which is, well, limit their own power. And here from Roger Sherman in December of 1787, let me pull this up on the screen here. He put it this way: all acts of the Congress not warranted by the Constitution would be void, nor could they be enforced contrary to the sense of a majority of the states. He's recognizing a few things. You can read into this a little bit, but you don't have to do too much, because ultimately they all understood that at some point, even if you had the best people and the best system and all that, sooner or later someone was going to go beyond the limits of the Constitution. Now, today that's constantly because the people have allowed it, because they didn't follow that second part, nor could they be enforced contrary to a sense of a majority of the states. So that means the states have to stop helping the federal government enforce stuff not warranted by the Constitution. And then ultimately, there's nothing to enforce if the people comply. So this is kind of a three-way thought process here. First of all, government is going to violate the rules, but it's not up to the government to determine if the government violated the rules. And then, therefore, the states have to refuse to participate in enforcement. And that really requires people refusing to comply in large numbers. Now, here, in Federalist number 16, Alexander Hamilton was actually arguing in favor of more centralized power, and he actually didn't like the idea that the states could do this, but he recognized this important truth. He pointed out that if the interposition of the state legislatures being necessary to give effect to a measure of the Union, they have not only not to act or to act evasively, and the measure is defeated. So as long as the federal government relies on states to participate or participate in enforcement in major ways, which they do on almost every federal program, or if they rely on them to do the implementation, if the states just don't do anything or they act evasively, which we're seeing more and more of, then they're going to defeat those measures without waiting on the federal government to even withdraw them. And that's how we approach almost everything. You can get full details on the strategy and the history in our State of the Nullification Movement report over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/report. Well, let's go through the latest news here. I want to start out with something that I covered last time, a couple of weeks ago, the Utah Constitutional Sovereignty Act. So last week, Utah Governor Spencer Cox signed this into law, the Constitutional Sovereignty Act. And the report from Mike Meharry points out that the new law creates a process to end state and local enforcement of some federal actions in the state and set the stage to stop them in practice and effect. So this is really what, if they are relying on the states to help enforce stuff, whether it's the DEA or the FBI or the ATF or anything, the EPA, HHS, if they are basically creating a partnership with the states, which is what they do for most federal programs, according to the National Governors Association, then all you have to do is opt out, because partnerships don't work too well when half the team quits. So they are creating this process, or they have created this process with Senate Bill 57, now law in Utah. I believe it went into immediate effect. So now they have a process. Let's get into that in a moment. Under the new law, the Utah legislature has the authority to pass a concurrent resolution prohibiting a state or local government officer from enforcing or assisting in the enforcement of a federal directive within the state if the legislature determines the federal directive violates the principles of state sovereignty. So they're not even saying, mind you, this process of opting out and refusing to participate in federal enforcement, you don't have to first say it's unconstitutional. You just decide you don't want to help. And the Supreme Court has backed this up for so many years. Now, we don't want to rely on the Supreme Court to give us permission because, well, this is the structure of the system. But they actually got it right under a legal doctrine known as anti-commandeering, where they've long held all the way back to 1842 and most recently in 2018 that the federal government cannot require the states to use personnel or resources of any way to help implement or effectuate or enforce federal acts or regulatory programs. They can just say, hey, it's Tuesday, we don't like your gun control, so we're not going to enforce it every Tuesday, or every day of the week would really be much better. So they're basically saying they're going to take a look at stuff, and if the legislature determines that it violates what they consider the principles of state sovereignty, they can pass this concurrent resolution saying they're not going to do it. And what I like about this process is it doesn't rely on the legislature always having to be in session. In Utah, I think it's only like a 60 or a 45-day session, which is a positive thing because then they can do less damage. But you always have to wait for the new legislative session, and this can go year-round. And here's how it works. When the legislature is convened and conducting business on the floor, identical motions to approve the request must be made in each chamber, and both motions must be approved by a 2/3 majority of the members present in each chamber. The process can also be started out of session by a request approved by the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. It passed the Senate by a vote of 24-5. The House passed it 57-14, and with Governor Cox's signature, the law went into immediate effect. So the question is, I kind of like this one. I generally don't like legislation that says, here, we're going to make a process to review things and determine if it's unconstitutional. And then if we determine that, or if the attorney general tells us this, or the governor tells us this, then we're going to opt out. Because generally I see that as grandstanding. They're creating a bunch of layers of stuff to kind of kick the decision over to someone else, and then you sit and wait, and then they can say, well, look, we did something good, and they never follow through on this. But this one, well, we'll wait and see. It's a very clear process and how they can use it. The question is, did they just do this for political grandstanding, or are they going to start passing resolutions, concurrent resolutions, opting out of enforcement stuff? I've seen some reports in the local press in Utah talking about how some of the sponsors and supporters of the bill say, hey, we're looking at a few things already to start implementing this on. So we'll keep an eye on what's going on in Utah. Senate Bill 57. The Constitutional Sovereignty Act signed as law. Next up, let's look at the Second Amendment Preservation Act. We know this was first signed as law in Missouri a few years ago. There's a more moderate version that's been passed in Arizona, in Kentucky, Montana, and elsewhere, and we're working to expand that. Here in Georgia, House Bill 1009 from Charlize Byrd would prohibit the use of state personnel or resources for the enforcement of any federal gun control. No, they're just saying if it's a federal gun control program, we're not going to participate. We're not going to help you whatsoever, period. Specifically, it would prohibit public officers and employees of the state and its political subdivisions from enforcing or participating in any way in the enforcement of any federal acts, executive orders, administrative orders, rules, regulations, statutes, or ordinances regarding firearms accessories, or firearm accessories, or ammunition. So all federal gun control, for us, all gun control is a violation of your natural right of self-defense. All federal gun control is a violation of the Constitution. So certainly opting out of that creates a process, just like what Roger Sherman was saying. The federal government may have all this stuff, the Gun Control Act of 1968, NFA of 1934, the bump stock ban, all this stuff from 1934 and beyond. They may have it on the books, but it can't be enforced contrary to a sense of the majority of the states. And then that requires the people to say, well, we have to learn how to exercise our natural right of self-defense, whether the government gives us permission to or not. And they generally don't like giving permission. So it also includes some pretty stiff penalties for any political subdivision that hires or retains someone who violates the act. But it bars public offices, or I'm sure that's the right word, public offices and state employees from providing, the key point is providing material support. So not only are they barred from actively enforcing, they can't even provide material support. It is defined as voluntarily giving or allowing others to make use of lodging, communications equipment or services, including social media accounts, facilities, weapons, personnel, transportation, clothing, or other physical assets. Now, if you've ever watched a DEA raid or seen pictures or video of one of these things, the same thing happens with the ATF too. Generally, what it is there will be one, maybe two federal agents overseeing the thing on the scenes, and the people that are in this long V kind of formation to knock down a door, and they're wearing all the gear and the shields and all that. Those are usually local police, so it's a coordination there. And then, of course, down the street, someone's doing traffic control, and that's also local police or local sheriff. or some other political subdivision of the state. So they wouldn't be able to help them in any of this. No communication, no nothing. The feds are going to do this. They got to try to pull it off on their own. We know that they can't. They've got about 5,100 employees for the whole country at the ATF. About a third of them are in administration, which means my government-run school education isn't good. I guess my math is not all that awesome. So maybe like 3,500 enforcement agents for the entire country. They can close somewhere around 10,000 cases per year. That's 10,000 too many. But think of it like this. If there were 10 or 11 or 12 million short-barreled shotguns undocumented in violation of the NFA of 1934, there's absolutely nothing the feds can do to actually put a dent into that at all. I mean, they'll scare some people, and of course they're very violent, but this is the process that the founders told us we should be using. So Georgia, House Bill 1009, we'll be monitoring that. Very similar legislation was just pre-filed in Louisiana. We'll have a report from TJ Martinell on that in the next day or so. That's House Bill 62. And then also just filed in Iowa, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, almost the same as this legislation in Georgia. This is House Bill or House File HF 2335 from Representative Jeff Shipley. We'll be tracking that and giving some updates on that as we're able to. We've also been monitoring the Ohio Second Amendment Preservation Act, House Bill 51, but the establishment team is not letting it out of committee, and so I don't think it's going to get a vote in this session, but we're ready for round 2 over there in Ohio, one way or the other. Let's move forward to the Defend the Guard Act. This is a legislation that would prohibit the governor from releasing states' National Guard troops into active duty combat unless Congress passes an official declaration of war or takes an official action pursuant to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the Constitution. Basically, they've been abusing Guard troops for decades, sending them into all kinds of undeclared wars, undeclared conflicts in violation of the Constitution, and really putting them in a position where it's either like follow your orders or get court-martialed and follow your oath. And it's going to be tough to find a lot of people who are defying that type of thing. So this is the Defend the Guard Act would actually create a really, really big step towards restoring the system the way it's supposed to be. Senate Bill 1121 in Arizona from State Senator Wendy Rogers, who I understand is very popular there, and I believe a veteran as well. It has now passed its second committee. This is by a vote of 4-3. It just passed the Senate Rules Committee. Last year, the Arizona Senate Defend the Guard Act from Rogers, I believe it's almost the same legislation. Maybe they made some technical changes. It was the first legislative chamber in the country to ever pass the legislation in modern times. And then just earlier this year, the New Hampshire House became the second legislative chamber to pass it. House Bill 229 passed by a vote of 187 or 189 to 182 is very close, but that'll be considered in the state Senate in New Hampshire very soon. So they passed it in the Arizona Senate last year, and then it stalled. The House side just didn't move it whatsoever. I think it was the House Speaker or somebody just wouldn't assign it to a committee, and then he waited to the last second. Basically, they use these parliamentary moves to try to slow things down. Now, Rogers now tells us, at least not us, but she tells the reporters that it now has the entire Republican team in the state Senate, at least, as co-sponsors. So it will pass over there unless something crazy happens. I even saw a Democratic co-sponsor jump on that. So it should get a vote in the full Senate chamber in the next few days, as early as today. And then there's also a companion bill on the House side. I don't have the bill number off the top of my head, but it also has a ton of co-sponsors and a lot of grassroots support from Bring Our Troops Home. TroopsHome.us, I believe, is the website. Dan and Diego and the whole team over there are doing awesome work. They've also been supporting the Maryland Defend the Guard Act, House Bill 299 from Delegate Robin Grammer. This is the same legislation. It was up for a committee hearing just recently. And we're told by Diego, at least I saw him post over on X just this week, that they're just one vote shy from getting it out of committee. So it's going to take some grassroots support from people who live in Maryland, calling the committee members. Don't be a jerk, because if you do, a lot of times these people, because they don't really have a lot of principles, they'll vote against something just because too many people called them and yelled at them about it. But if you just say, look, hey, I support House Bill 299, the Defend the Guard Act. I want you to vote yes on this in your committee, and just be firm but professional about it. A few dozen phone calls can sometimes flip one vote. They just have to flip one vote. I'm not sure who it is, but you'll want to check out Bring Our Troops Home for more details on that. That's Maryland House Bill 299. Now, I also want to, I'll get to central bank digital currencies in just a moment, but I should point out that all these things that I'm mentioning in this episode, the couple of original source documents from Sherman and Hamilton, plus all these reports and bills and all that, these are going to be linked to over in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. Alan Mosley does all the coordination of the blog post for every single episode. And he puts together all the links that I'm mentioning in each episode, at least the ones that I've included in the show notes, at least on my Google Doc over here. And I will get that published over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty in a couple of hours. So that's in case you have questions or you want to act in support of a bill or you want to read about it or share it and get it moving in your own state. This is where you're going to find all the details. And while I'm here, I want to take another moment and say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat. I appreciate you being here, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one. I want to apologize for people who are watching the live stream if you got kind of a false start. I kicked off the stream and been having some technical issues since I've tried to do some expansion on what all the platforms we're reaching. I've screwed a few things up. I thought I had it solved, and I guess not. But I'll do some tests over the next day or so. So hopefully everything starts smoothly on Friday's episode. But hi to Kirk and Dixie Strong, Cheriton Farmer, John, Haji, Melody, King Nobody, Tyler B. Good to see you. Been a while. Alan, Melody, Rick, and everyone else. There's Dave on Facebook, Nicholas Roberts, Citizen Debs. I appreciate you all being here. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty is where you're going to find the episode with the blog post and all the show notes and the links and plus all the different platforms we're on so you can keep up to date with us. Of course, if you support the show and you want to help us reach and teach more people, nothing helps us more than our membership program. But in the meantime, free and easy peasy, smashing the like, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, etc. All that stuff can tell these platforms to show us to more people. I appreciate your help in that respect. But let's get over to central bank digital currencies. Just this week, I believe it was on Monday, the South Dakota House passed two bills to reject a central bank digital currency. One, to remove it from the definition of money in the state, and two, to ban the state from accepting it as payments or participating in tests and things like that. So kind of a 1-2 punch. This is House Bill 1163, which would expressly exclude a central bank digital currency from the definition of money in South Dakota. And House Bill 1161 would prohibit state agencies from accepting a CBDC as a form of payment. So the 1161, I'm trying to get the numbers right, banning state agencies from accepting it as payment passed 64-1. Only one person was against that. And 1163, removing it from the definition of money, passed 44-21. Now, this is going to go over to the Senate. It's got to go through the committee process, these two bills. But one that also removes a CBDC from the definition of money in the state already passed the state Senate. That's Senate Bill 58 by a vote of 29-2. So I'm pretty certain we're going to see both of these get to the governor unless somebody slows it down. Now, there's no guarantee of how this is going to play out, but we know they want to implement this stuff. They want to take that fiat money that they've used to control us by funding the empire, both abroad and at home, and make it a digital version so they can monitor and track everything that we do and make it worse and worse and worse. So we want to see the states and individuals make as many roadblocks as possible. Now, the ultimate roadblock is millions and millions of people just saying, we're not going to use this, whether you try to make us to or not. But this may give some people who are on the margins a little courage, so it's positive to see these things moving forward in South Dakota. In Utah, a very similar piece of legislation. This is banning or removing a central bank digital currency from the definition of money, both under the Uniform Commercial Code, sorry about that, UCC, but also under the Utah Specie Legal Tender Act, the first state in modern times to actually recognize gold and silver as money, which is what they should have been doing all along, but at least they got the ball rolling back in 2011. But in that act, they made sure to expressly say, look, central bank digital currency, whoever may issue it, that's not going to be considered money in Utah. That passed the Utah House Bill 164. It passed by a vote of 68-0. No opposition whatsoever. It's simple, straightforward stuff. let's pass this. Let's see how it kind of plays out. And the more states, if you get 50 states or 40 states saying, we're not going to participate in this, this might actually slow down or make them pause how they approach it. And that's the way we're looking at that. It's nice to see a preemptive measure for something that's coming down the pike, but we'll see. Now, this is similar to legislation. It was first signed as law in Indiana in 2023 and then followed up by Florida, also in effect, removing a central bank digital currency from the definition of money. Now, speaking of Indiana, so since they already removed CBDC from a definition of money, they are working on a follow-up piece of legislation. For us, we also follow Thomas Jefferson's advice. The ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. So step by step by step, we have to be contented with what we can secure every moment we can get it, and then always push forward, eternally push forward for what is yet to get, is how Jefferson put it in a letter to the Reverend Charles Clay in 1790. So one step from Indiana last year, we're saying a central bank digital currency is not within the definition of money under the Uniform Commercial Code in the state. Now they've got a follow-up bill that just passed the state Senate, Senate Bill 180, by a vote of 48-0. And the legislation here from Mike Meharry would prohibit state agencies from accepting payments made with a central bank digital currency for any service, tax, license, permit, fee, information, or other amount due to the governmental body. It would also bar government agencies from requiring payments to be made with a central bank digital currency. So no accepting and no requiring to anyone. Additionally, under the proposed law, this is interesting, state government bodies would be prohibited from advocating for or supporting the testing, adoption, or implementation of a central bank digital currency by the United States government. That part of the legislation has already been passed as law in Alabama. So we see different states taking different approaches, small steps, and Indiana recognizing, well, oh, Alabama did this, we did this, we did A, they did B, we should do B as well. And that's how you really need to approach this. You have to relentlessly push forward. So Senate Bill 180 passed the state Senate unanimously by a vote of 48-0. Also talking about money, of course, we want to support sound money. Article 1, Section 10 is pretty clear about gold and silver and legal tender. But if you tax money, like a lot of states do in various forms, not as many tax it on sales, but you also have capital gains tax. If you're taxing gold and silver, you're really not treating it as money. I'll get to that in a moment. But here in Wisconsin, well, not here in Wisconsin, I think about that because that's where my mother is, that's where I grew up. But a Wisconsin Senate committee passed Senate Bill 33 by a vote of 5-3. It eliminates sales tax on gold and silver bullion. In Iowa, Senate Bill or House File 659, HF 659, also removes a tax. So it's very interesting to see some states actually removing a tax. That's pretty rare to see states saying, we're going to stop robbing you, we're going to stop stealing. But House Bill or Senate Bill 33 passed 5-3 out of committee in Wisconsin. That's a step forward. In Iowa, to remove capital gains taxes rather than sales taxes, that passed a subcommittee by a vote of 3-0. And here from Mike Meharry's report on the Iowa bill, he said, as Sound Money Defense League Policy Director J.P. Cortez testified, quote, in effect, states that collect taxes on the sale of precious metals are inherently saying gold and silver are not money at all. They're saying it's a commodity. It's a mere investment vehicle. Not a mere. Investment vehicles are important, but if you take something that is actually thousands of years, actually real money, you substitute fake fiat funny money, and then you require people to pay you a percentage of fake fiat funny money for using the real money, you know what the goal is. They certainly don't want people using real money. So these are important, but it may seem like small steps on a state level. I think they're big ones, even though they may not have a big impact immediately. But Mike describes, for example, a sales tax on gold and silver. This is how it kind of plays out. He says, imagine if you asked a grocery clerk to break a $5 bill and he charged you a 35-cent tax. Silly, right? After all, you were only exchanging one form of money for another, but that's essentially what taxes on gold and silver bullion do. So they charge you And maybe it's not 35 cents. Maybe in some places it's 50. Maybe it's more. That's just the sales tax. And now, majority of the states have removed sales taxes. I believe it's like 40 or so that have done this. But as Ron Paul says, we ought not to tax money. That's what he said in support of legislation like this in Arizona regarding capital gains taxes a few years ago. Because if you tax money, it's no longer money. It's a commodity, and they don't want us to use it as money. And when people want to use it as money, it doesn't take too long to determine, especially in a time where they're devaluing our purchasing power by inflating the money supply and depreciating the value of the fiat money. A 5 to 10% increase in costs can really be a huge deterrent on using another form or actual money for many people. Now, capital gains taxes, it doesn't work exactly the same way, but it's very similar in practice because what they're telling you is if you buy some gold at $1,000 an ounce and then you use it to purchase something while it's valued at $2,000 an ounce in fiat money rather than just gold being 1 ounce of gold is 1 ounce of gold, then what they're saying is you're not actually making a purchase with that gold. You are first, even if you just give them the 1 ounce of gold and they give you your 1 ounce of gold of products, they're saying, no, technically what's happening in the law, well, we can call it law in quotes, what's actually happening is you're exchanging the gold for US dollars and you get $2,000 and your purchase is actually being made with US dollars. So therefore, we're going to charge you a capital gains tax on the amount of increase from when you purchase it valued at $1,000 to now $2,000. So it might be way more than a 35-cent tax for people who have bought and held for quite a long time. So removing sales tax in Wisconsin and then capital gains taxes in Iowa, I believe they've already removed the sales tax. That means these states are just moving closer towards treating gold and silver as they always should have been, which is money. And interestingly enough, there's even a bill in Hawaii. I don't think this one's going to pass. House Bill 1724 would remove gold and silver bullion from the state sales tax. But, if I ever want to think about a TAC satellite office on the Big Island, I guess I want to see this type of thing move forward. So House Bill 1724 in Hawaii, we want to see move forward very quickly. One other area that I want to cover is firearm purchasing financial transactions privacy legislation. A lot of people, or I've been calling it the Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act. I think firearm financial transactions privacy. It doesn't really roll off the tongue, but that's how it's called in Utah. So in Indiana, back to Indiana, House Bill 1084 just passed the full House by a vote of 73 to 22. It would prohibit financial institutions from requiring merchant category codes for a purchase that identifies a merchant as a firearms retailer. It also prohibits the Indiana Department of Justice from maintaining a list of firearm purchases based on information from its background checks. So first of all, they're just saying, hey, if you're going to use a credit card to make a purchase of a firearm accessory or ammunition, we can't come up with some kind of credit card processing code so we can actually determine who is making that purchase based on your transaction history. This is just financial surveillance. Of course, the banking system is compromised, and I'm not a fan of it. I would rather people use other forms of money, like, for example, a gold back. I would actually encourage, we can get into another episode, but fiat money isn't good in one way or another. But certainly people still need to be able to make purchases. And not everybody can go in person. Not everybody can do cash. Some people want to do this. Well, you don't want to restrict their ability to do something and say, well, just because you decided to use your credit card or your debit card, now we want to be able to track you and make a registry of you. So this is very positive. And in 2023, Mississippi, Idaho, North Dakota, Montana, Texas, and Florida all passed similar laws. So this is already on the books in those states. And even while those laws were being considered, a proposal from the credit card companies to actually implement this MCC, merchant category code, to track firearms purchases was scrapped, at least was put on pause. So we've been pushing to get more and more of these. I'm starting to see some of the gun organizations covering them. They really didn't cover them last year. I saw over at NRA ILA that they're certainly watching these things in Utah and elsewhere. So House Bill 1084 passed in Indiana House, the Indiana House, by a vote of 73 to 22. The more that states do this, if they were willing to put it on pause just for 3 or 4 states merely considering the legislation, if you get 20 or 25 passing and making it law that they can't actually do this, this is going to create a roadblock. I mean, maybe they'll be able to find a way through it or wiggle room or get the federal government to force it. But as long as we can push it back, we can open that door to more freedom, we get a chance to push for further. That's just how Thomas Jefferson put it. The ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. So the same type of bill, House Bill 406, the Utah Firearm Financial Transactions Privacy Act. House Bill 406 passed out of committee in the state. What committee is this? House Revenue and Taxation Committee passed just at the end of last week by a vote of 8-0. It might be getting a vote in the full House as early as now. It's up for consideration, so it is on third reading in the State House, House Bill 406. We will certainly be monitoring that and covering it over at 10thamendmentcenter.com as soon as we get an update. Now, of course, absolutely nothing helps us keep up to date on this kind of legislation. Report on them, read through them, analyze them, reach out to more and more people, send emails, post them all over social so people can take action and support. Nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We also have annual, lifetime, and 5-year options. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. If you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way because we will use it to take a stand for the Constitution and liberty, whether the government likes it or not. And guess what? They absolutely hate it. And while I'm here mentioning that, I should say a quick but very huge thank you to just a handful of people who have joined us as members recently. There's Brandon here in California, Amy in Georgia, Dan in Texas, Timothy in Wisconsin, Jonathan in Texas, and Angela in Arizona. I know there's a few other people out there in the chat that I see. I appreciate all of you. And whether it's $2 a month or $2 zillion, it doesn't matter. I'm so grateful for any consideration you can give to putting your financial faith behind our work. Let me take a look over in the live chat and see if there's any comments or questions I can get back to you. Deborah Curl says South Carolina is going to vote in this same bill soon. Yes, we're tracking legislation against basically to just say a central bank digital currency is not money. And then also legislation to say, well, we're not going to participate in the testing or do trial runs. We're not going to work with the Federal Reserve on implementing. We're not going to help them at all. And we're not going to accept it as payment here on the state level. Or there's one in Hawaii that I also think was really interesting. It didn't actually ban anything, but it specifically said that everyone would have, if it passes into law, and this was a Democrat-sponsored bill too, it just got filed in the last week or so. No one can be required to use a central bank digital currency. So they're approaching it from the other direction, but it certainly is pretty interesting to see how these bills are passing with massive support across the spectrum, maybe because it doesn't actually do anything concrete against something that's implemented right now. But certainly the more that we get this happening, the more that we can learn how maybe the approach needs to be changed, or there's a loophole in the legislation. We can fix that rather than after the fact and after all the chaos they create, but as we're ramping up to try to stop it in advance. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I think Senate Bill 864 off the top of my head is one of them in South Carolina, but there is legislation in Wisconsin and maybe 8 or 9 other states already. New Hampshire has a vote on House Bill 1232, maybe today in committee, to ban the state from accepting CBDC as payments. So we'll be monitoring and reporting on a bunch of other ones as we go forward. Anyways, I'll read through more of the comments and questions a little bit later today and tomorrow. I get a lot of great feedback and ideas for future episodes from your comments. You can also email me at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you're encouraged to take action in support of this kind of legislation in your state and to get it out to more and more people so they can do it as well. And I hope to see you next time here on the path to liberty.